Session today with Rachel Saltzman, who's the author of the new book, Russia, Brics, and the Disruption of Global Order, which I'm told you'll be able to purchase outside. Rachel most recently was a visiting scholar at the Department of European and Eurasian Studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS, has also been affiliated with Georgetown, Carnegie, and a bunch of other places. She's got this new book out, which is very timely. It talks about the history of Russia's challenge to global order, its efforts to create alternative forms of global order, which is something that has continued down to the present in various forms. Rachel's going to talk about the book for a little while, and then we're going to have a conversation up here, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Please do silence your cell phones and other noise-making devices. And if you want to move closer to the front, please feel free to do that. And then if there are no objections, I'll turn the floor to Rachel.
Great, thank you, Jeff. It's lovely to be here. It's great to see some familiar faces in the audience. So as Jeff said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the book, where it comes from, what its main topics and arguments are, and then we'll go from there. So I just want to start with saying that the title of today's event, Putin, America, and Brics, is actually a bit of a feint, and intentionally so. Brics both is and isn't about Putin, and it is and it isn't about the US. And that's actually a lot of what I look at in the book. So on the Brics side, Brics responds to some real failings in the current world order, but it also clearly has some strong strains of anti-Westernism and anti-Americanism. And it's important to hold those nuances simultaneously, that it is both against us and not against us for a variety of competing or complementary reasons. Similarly, Putin has been a driver in the creation of Brics, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But the Brics process, or Russia's goals in bringing Brics together, is in some ways just a new form, or maybe a more global and successful form, of a very long-standing strain in Russian foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, Soviet foreign policy, and even imperial foreign policy. So you're not looking at anything that is a qualitatively new development in how Russia's leaders have historically encountered the global system. It is a new twist on an old story, if you will. So if you're looking at the roots of this, and that's really where I come from, right? What struck me initially about the story of Brics is Russia's ongoing struggle or inability to find an appropriate place in the post-Cold War order, right? We all know the story, or a lot of us know the story, of the 1990s efforts to bring Russia into Western institutions, the IMF, the G7, and then the G8, and what that was about. Initial offers for Russia to be part of Partnership for Peace in 1994, and how a lot of that then falls apart for a variety of reasons, both domestic in terms of how privatization proceeded in the 90s under Yeltsin, also concerns in Russia over NATO enlargement, and concerns over whether what that meant and what NATO's role in the post-Cold War order should be. I think it's also worth saying that there continues to be a real disagreement over Western and American motives in the 1990s. The most magnanimous interpretation of US foreign policy toward Russia in the 1990s and early 2000s is very much bring them into our institutions and they will become like us, and this will be good for everyone. It will lead to political stability, it will lead to economic growth, and it will lead to peace because you don't shoot your best customer. And if you build the economics, then the rest will follow. I think that has proved basically untrue, but that doesn't mean that, if you will, America's heart was in the wrong place. By the late 1990s, you do see a real deterioration of this, and by 1997, you have the beginning of what Russia will term the beginning of Brics history, and that is Primakov, who is then the prime minister. He had also been foreign minister at some point, Yevgeny Primakov, suggestion in the Delhi airport that Russia, India, and China coordinate and form what he called a strategic triangle. It became RIC, Russia, India, China, and those three countries are really the core of what Russia sees in Brics. India and China were not terribly enthused about this process, mainly because they saw it as too anti-American. You then lose a few years, partly because of the financial collapse in 1998 in Russia, a variety of other processes. And by 2003, when you again have an ebbing of the US-Russia relationship as a result of the Yukos affair within Russia, the American invasion of Iraq, and a variety of other related forces. And you also have a set of rising powers that have been identified by the banking world, in this case Goldman Sachs, as those who will lead the new global economy and what that means. And Goldman Sachs is mainly looking at it from a banking perspective, from an investment perspective. But the countries themselves, and in this case particularly Russia and Brazil, focus in on it as something that can become a political coordinating platform, if you will. And I always think it's very interesting to remember that Brics, which has developed into something which can absolutely be interpreted through an anti-Western lens, even if that is not its only purpose, comes from a Western bank's idea, right? And they have capitalized on the idea of Brics, even as Brics, the Goldman Sachs term of these are the countries that have the highest GDP per growth, most population, et cetera, and are going to lead the global economy, has become, we are going to be the new powers in the new global order. Putin pushes very hard on the creation of Brics beginning in 2005. And that process sort of proceeds apace with meetings of foreign ministers on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, meetings on the sidelines of the G8. But what you then have in 2008 with the global financial crisis is the seizing of an opportunity, right? With the global financial crisis, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers on September 15th, 2008, you have enormous fear in the US of decoupling from the rising powers, that they will go on and create their own system, and that the US and the other leading Western powers should probably come to an accommodation with them now while we still have some weight before we lose all leverage. That obviously didn't happen exactly, but it did give Brics an opening to coordinate and to really burst forth. And the development of Brics since 2008 has proceeded, I would say, somewhat independently from what Putin wished for when he started initiating meetings in 2005. And so what you have by 2014, which is a real fulcrum in the story of Russia and Brics because of the onset of the crisis in Ukraine, or sort of the major developments, if you will. The onset was 2013, but with the annexation of Crimea, that's where stuff gets really interesting from the Brics perspective. And by 2014, you have a Russia that is quite isolated from the international system, that is looking at the various alternate institutional alignments it has pursued since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this includes the Eurasian Economic Union, the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, and Brics, to figure out which alignments will give it the most leverage and will also serve the most purpose, because all of a sudden Russia's out of the G8, and it is under sanctions, which has an economic effect, not just the obvious, but it needs new trading partners. Most of Russia's trade, energy-wise, Europe was its biggest consumer. China has been Russia's largest trading partner since, I believe, about 2011, but in terms of dollars spent, and certainly price paid for gas and for oil, Europe was way ahead. So what you have in 2014 is a moment of looking, and can Brics, which for Russia has been about talking about a new world order and talking about how the Western system is insufficient and Brics is a new option that is truly democratic, by which he means, of course, not internal democracy, but every voice, every country, every major power, which is not every country, gets an equal voice. Can this then become something that's operationally useful for Russia? And so these are all themes that I explore in the book in rather more detail, also going into really looking at how Russian rhetoric, particularly elite political rhetoric, which is to say primarily Putin, but also Medvedev when he was president, and some speeches by Sergei Lavrov, the longstanding foreign minister as well, how do they talk about the idea of BRICS and why does that matter? And the argument there is what they say is important for understanding how they wish Russian foreign policy to be perceived and where they wish it to go, even if those aren't the ultimate policy outcomes. So I think I've given enough of an overview that we can hopefully then move to some discussion, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions after.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the overview. So let me start by asking you a little bit about BRICS and what it actually does. I focus on this region, and I don't have a great sense of what BRICS does. I think for most people in the United States, even most policy practitioners, there's also a little bit of mystification about what the operations of this, I don't even want to call it an organization, but this forum actually look like. Maybe you could say a little bit about
Sure, that's a great
why
question.
BRICS?
And it's also often one of the fundamental questions. I think there's two parts of that. One is what is BRICS, and the other is how should BRICS be understood. What is BRICS has changed over time. When you had the first meeting of deputy foreign ministers in 2005, it was a chance for, at the time, 4 countries, now 5 countries because South Africa joined in 2011, to talk about their discontents and cooperate on issues of interest. It then became more formalized after the financial crisis because you start seeing BRICS operate essentially as a pressure group within the G20. And to this day, they meet on the sidelines of the G20, they pre-coordinate, and they use that pre-coordination to push their objectives. The biggest example of this was the successful adoption by the G20 and then by the IMF of a change in quota weights and voting weights, therefore, in the IMF. That went through in 2010. It didn't actually go into effect until 2015, but that had more to do with our Congress than with the G20 or the IMF. In addition to being, at the beginning, an effective pressure group, excuse me, it also developed from that cooperation what Oliver Stunkel, who is a Brazilian scholar on BRICS, has called the spillovers of cooperation. What that means in practical terms is the BRICS leaders realized it was effective to cooperate on the sidelines of the G20 and sort of wondered where else cooperation would be effective. And they started exploring that and developed initially 5 to 6 working groups, and they now have, I believe, upwards of 15. They meet throughout the year. They have annual leaders summits. They have annual ministerials for each major. And also, most importantly, they have annual, or not even annual, they have multiple sub-ministerial meetings. What this means is the people who actually get stuff done, not the pretty face or the big name who takes the picture, but the people who are going to do the negotiating and who are going to figure out what cooperation looks like, are having regular contacts. And this contact represents the interests of each BRICS country differently. So for example, Russia, which is more interested on the political side, initiated meetings of national security advisors. Those have been going on since 2009. Brazil, which was chairing the G20 in 2009, and also, like India and China, tend to be more interested in the geo-economic side rather than geopolitical side of BRICS, initiated finance minister meetings, and trade minister meetings also happen, but you also have a lot of stuff that's focused on development. What these are 5 developing countries. Russia is sort of developed, sort of developing, and sort of misdeveloped, but it certainly has a lot of issues in terms of the structure of its market, poverty, infrastructure, a lot of things that we think of as problems of the developing world that Russia can benefit from conversation about. Now, we can have a conversation about whether cooperating in the BRICS format is the best way for these countries to accomplish those objectives. But if we're looking at it holistically and sort of from a non-value-based assessment, what BRICS is developed into a full-fledged format for cooperation among these countries on a variety of issues of political and economic concern. And it also developed its own institutions, which are active. The BRICS Development Bank was formed in 2014 at the Fortaleza Summit. They announced in the recent BRICS Summit in Brasilia, which took place in mid-November, that they will be continuing their process of opening regional offices in all BRICS countries. They already have one in South Africa. That happened fairly early. India and Russia will be up in 2020. It's headquartered in Hong Kong. Sorry, in China, in Beijing, I believe, but possibly Shanghai. And you also have a contingency reserve arrangement, which is essentially a currency pool for emergency liquidity. So what Brics is another global institution. It's not an institution the way we think about institutions, and I think that's the other half of it, right? Western scholars or Western media will look at Brics and say, this makes no sense. You have 5 countries that have different economic structures, different places in the global pecking order, different major exports, different political leadership. What the heck do they have to cooperate on, right? If you look at the 3 contiguous Eurasian members, which is to say Russia, China, and India, obviously they have some overlapping security concerns, but even there, China and India have an ongoing territorial dispute. They almost came to kinetic conflict in September 2017, right before the summit in Xiamen. So what the heck is going on? And it's a really interesting question, but I think it's the wrong question. I think we, especially since the end of the Cold War, are conditioned to look at global institutions or alliances on the basis of shared values, on the basis of similarities. And that's not how these countries look at it. They look at it as, can we cooperate on limited shared aims? And they do, and they can. And sometimes that means a shared aim at a very high level of abstraction, right? So if you look at global economic governance, what China wants out of global economic governance is quite different, really, from what Russia wants out of a reform of global economic governance. What they both want, though, is for the US to have less power in global economic governance. So they can cooperate on language that talks about there being a more democratic distribution, which everyone understands to mean the US should have less power, without having to get into the details of China should have this much and Russia should have this much and India should have this much, right? And I think that that ability to coordinate at the level that they agree while not dealing with the places that they don't agree is an enormous strength of Brics and is something that Western analysts tend to miss, and I think to our detriment.
So that kind of gets to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the title of the book is Russia, Brics, and the Disruption of Global Order. So I wanted to ask about the disruption of global order piece, because it sounds like this is a very decentralized organization, or maybe organization is not even the right word. It's a very decentralized forum where there are opportunities for the leadership of the 5 countries to get together and create common positions around issues of mutual concern. Now, as you alluded to at the end of your remarks there, some of that has to do, particularly when it comes to Moscow and Beijing, with reducing the role that the United States plays in global institutions of various kinds. But that's maybe one piece of what Brics does, and I don't know the extent to which that objective is shared by, let's say, South Africa or India or other countries who have, much different kinds of relationships with the United States. But
泛的传播，我不会做一个很长的介绍。
Aruna next to me, who has been doing really
阿罗娜
fantastic reporting for the Wall
坐
Street
在我
Journal
边
on the
上
same
的，
topic, and I'm going to quote
他
from
最近也在这一领
one
域
of
做
her
了
stories
很
from
多
April this
工
year
作
because。it sets us up nicely, where in a piece co-authored with her colleague Dustin Volz, the first sentence
他
says,
跟
Chinese
他的一个
spies
同
are
事，
increasingly recruiting U.S.
中国的
intelligence
间谍
officers as part of a
在不
widening
断的
sustained
增长，
campaign to shake
在
loose
美国
government secrets.
来
Current and former
盗
U.S.
取
officials
国
say
家的
China
很多
has
机
also
密。
grown bolder and more successful in traditional spy games,
中国中共
including targeting less conventional recruits. And she quotes the now infamous statement by
中共在不断的增加他们的在国外的情报机关的人员，越来越大胆，越来越细致的盗取美国的各种信息。没有任何国家像中共那样，有这么大的威胁。他们通过各种私人的机构和公司， 他。
And finally, and this is one of my
和各
favorite
种
quotes from the piece
专业
by
学者
Rob Joyce, he says, Russia is the hurricane, it comes in fast and hard. China
俄
is
罗斯
climate
是
change,
台
long,
风，
slow,
像
pervasive.
像台风一样
I hope and
来
I
的
suspect
很
that,
强烈，但是
all
很
of the
快。
three people
中
on the
国
stage
中
here will
共
have disagreements
像
both on some of these
气候
statements,
变化一样
between
来得
each
很
other
慢，
about
但
this issue
是
of
持
Chinese
续的
espionage, about what we
扩
think
张。
we know about organs like the Ministry of State Security, the MSS, what some of the myths are that we
今天的
that
新
we
书是
believe that,
两位
that
作
aren't
者
true.
介绍很多关于
So
中
without
国
further
国家
ado,
安全
I'm
部
going to turn
还
it
有
over
其
to the
他
two
的一些
authors,
机构
Peter Madison
我
and
们
Matt
了解的
Brazil. What
很
we're
少
going to
的。
do is we're going to turn it to them for 20,
这两
25
位作
minutes. They're
者
going to walk
是
us
孟佩
through
德和
the book
马
and
特
findings,
巴
how
西
it was
两
organized,
位
how this beautiful partnership
书的
came
作
about.
者，他们
And
如
then I
何
will
合作
moderate
写
a
这本
discussion
书。
here with all
等一
three
下
of them
我
on
会
these issues,
调
and
节
then we'll save some time for Q&A. I will plant the seed
一
now
些
that the
问
Q&A
题。
period is primarily, if not solely, about actual questions. So as you're thinking of the long discursive comment you want to make, I'd ask that you
如果你想提
email
问
it
题
to
的
us
话
instead of using
就
precious
提
time
就
here.
是
We
比
really
较
want to hear
简短
everyone's
的真
questions
正
so
的
we
问
can
题。
hear
如
about
果你
them.
想
So
讨
be
论的话，
thinking
很
of
长的讨论，那么
tight
请给
questions
我
to
们
ask when we get
发
to
邮
the
件
Q&A。period. And
因
with
为我
that,
们
I
想
will
把
turn it
时间
over
宝贵的
to
时间
Matt
留
and
给
Peter.
问题。现在就
First,
是
thank
把
you very
问
much, Jude and CSIS for hosting us today.
孟佩
And
德
thank you
和
also
巴西
to
先生，
Glenn
谢
Howard
谢
and the Jamestown Foundation, as well as Glenn Griffith and the Naval Institute Press for
谢谢詹姆斯
believing in the
敦
project and
基金
carrying
会，
it
还有
forward. A quick disclaimer: since I am in a government position, I am speaking here solely in a personal capacity.
就是首先声明一点呢，我现在坐在这里讲话呢，是完全都是我自己的个人的意见，并不代表国家国会和行政机构中国委员会的意见，也不代表美国政府的意见，和詹姆斯基金会的意见完全都是我个人的意见。我并不喜欢让大家失望，就是怎么说，不要对我的书有太多的希望。所以我想我的书呢，只是一个对中共情报系统的这么一个入门的敲门砖吧。有一部分呢，就是因为就是把中国的特工系统，就是把他们的神秘性给它揭开。但我们一说中国有5000年的历史，有3000年的历史，但是他们的中共的情报系统，我们能够看到的和了解到的。
Not the final answer. And
这本书呢，只是一个开始，并不是一个最后的答案。中共的情报系统，我们如何摆放？就是从1920年代到我们如今的这个时代。
For the need to demystify, I think there's no further way.
揭开它的神秘性。
The idea that's been kicking around for a very long time about a grains of sand approach to intelligence. Sometimes called a mosaic approach, or any of a host of kind of tentacle-like metaphors for describing what the Chinese government is doing or what the intelligence services are doing.
中共的情报系统，他们
passed around by a little anecdote saying that the grains of sand on a beach are the information products that you want to gather. The Russians would have a submarine surface in the middle of the night. A Spetsnaz team would come ashore. They'd pick up a few buckets of sand. They'd go back to the submarine and be gone by dawn.
苏联他们会用潜艇，然后就回去了。如果那个海滩上有一个信息的话呢，中国呢，他们就会把100个人送去晒太阳，然后他们回来的时候，他们就会比方说，在他们的那个毛巾上会有很多沙子抖落下来。
You don't get to send 1,000 bathers. You can't even get 1,000 Americans onto that public beach or onto that beach in a very easy way because of the security clearance process.
因为如果在中国的话，你就不能这么做，你甚至不能把100个美国人送到这个沙滩上。
And it had a few problems with it. The first was that they said.
首先呢，就是有几个问题。首先，中共的特工。
They didn't use traditional methods of recruiting sources.
他们便不用传统的那种特工方式来招聘招聘特工人员，然后通过这些特工人员之间那些传统的联系和培训。第二个呢，中国的特工系统。马特会说一些这个部分的内容，有很多案例。如果你看我们的书的话，你会看到那些很顽固的那些间谍事件。第三个要点是，任何中国的任何的中共的实体公司，中国的特工系统和俄罗斯或者美国的特工系统都很不同。当我们提到美国的特工，就是我们会指美国的特工系统，但中共的特工系统，任何中国人看上去，如果他们是在收集信息的话，他们就会被认为是中国的特工人员。跟美国的特工系统比起来。
They must be intelligence because that's how we're doing it. The system is set up differently, but that's the wrong way to do it. And again, that speaks to why we chose kind of a conservative approach about what we included.
我们在这本书里所采用的方法呢，就是比较传统的方法。
Every Chinese person as a potential spy.
第二个问题就是说，任何一个中国人可能都看上去像中共的间谍。
And has a notable feature of not really being true.
这并不是真实的。
To say that the Chinese intelligence services have had more success recruiting Chinese people or ethnic Chinese nationals abroad, that part you can see, but to say that that's been solely the focus or that that's where they were really putting all of their effort, I don't think accurately captures the history. So I'll just sort of sum that up with saying, the Chinese intelligence services have always had
中共的特工系统。
The Bernard Bersico case, for example, the Larry Wu Tai-chin case, these are great classic cases that are detailed.
就有一些过去的中共的情报系统人员，比方说金无代的案例，还有李振成的案例。
There are people going to borders and getting whisked across and not having stamps in their passport, so they can go have meetings. This is traditional and classic.
在过去呢，就是这些秘密的间谍们，他们比方说在护照上并没有过海关的这个盖章，那么他们可以到另外一个国家去秘密会见他们的联络人，这是过去的以前的方式。很多年我们看到中共的特工系统他们的范围，因为比方说东亚的安全问题、台湾的问题，所以这个范围呢，中共的特工间谍系统是很令人有威胁性的。可以看到，在我们书中谈到的这个不同的时间范围。中共的中间的那个系统并不是说多好，但是最近的一些年呢， 他们有很大的发展。这个国安部呢是1983年建立的，就是是由一些个不同的部门的人组合起来的，比方说是从公安部。
have better luck with people who they can communicate with directly and more readily, and have sort of shared sort of cultural references and things.
所以有一些人，比方说他们并没有专业的培训到国外去做特工工作。在1990年代的时候，国安部和中共的部队。
The author talks about a meeting that they had in the early 1990s with the Minister of State Security, who said, look, you need to write this book because our people don't know their history, they don't know what they're a part of, and we need to build that esprit de corps.
当时的国安部的人员就是说，你们要写一本书，因为我们国家的人指中国人，并不了解中国的特工系统和历史，比方说李克农之类，他们这些人。
And the foreword to that book is written by the Ministry of State Security's General Office, and it explicitly says this book is for you to study and to sort of see the history of Li Kenong.
办公人员，他们最后写了这本书，包括李克农，在现代社会，我们应该学到什么样的经验和教训，在现代这个时期。另外一个事情，他们做的就是说，他们正在做一个培训的项目，比方说现在跟传统以前比起来，那么现在缺乏现代的这些一些个技术和技能。所以国安部是开始就是招聘一些很年轻的人，有的甚至是高中生。如果你感兴趣做这个事情的话，比如他们对学生说，我们可以给你提供你们一些支持和帮助，那么你们就专注在学这些领域上，比如说电脑技术。他们有一些报告说国安部开始了一些实习项目，比方说把这些学生送到大公司去，让他们可以学到很多需要的技能和技术。
So not entirely successful, but it is, for those of you who have bumped into a younger generation Ministry of State Security officer, there is a much greater degree of sophistication, more language skills, and ability to interact.
如果你不巧碰到一些中国的特工人员的话，那么他们可能就比较年轻，而且他们有很多技能，比方说语言上的。另外一点就是现在呢，就是系统变得很复杂和高级。他们看到了在网络上的这些个尝试和优势。以前的话，如果你想要截取信号的话，你必须要有一些机构，比方说你得有卫星，你要有电线，你有很多，你还有破码加密这样的很多的机构设施。就是以前呢，中国是没有这些设施的。是70年代末和80年代呢，就是中国还就开始，但是还是比较落后的。就中共的军队和国安部做的很好的，就是说他们把这些人一些人送到一些
and therefore you had interchange, you had
国
contractors,
企
you
和
had,
私企当中。
you had the benefits of the private sector with the ability to keep people focused and on target in government.
他们把国安部的一些部门的人呢送到一些私企里边去，这样的好处呢，就是说他们可以在这些单位里头，就是专注于他们自己的领域。所以外部的人并不了解这些国安部的人到底在哪里，在干什么。那他们呢，就是比中共的这个军队的部门的特工呢，就是做得更加成功。
You had to get it in, you had to find a way to capture communications, you had to find a way to exfiltrate the data. It's a complicated process. And it meant that, for the bug that was discovered inside the US State Department in 1999, you actually had to be able to take a photograph of the wooden sideboard in the conference room. You had to know the quality of your picture to recognize.
比方说，举个例子，以前的话，如果想获取一个信息是很复杂的。比方说，在1999年，在美国国会内部呢，就是找到的这一个监听器，那你要拍照片，然后你要去看它的照片的质量，你还有然后如果想把这个信息弄回去的话，你还要有一个麦克之类的。这个最近最大的变化呢，飞跃，就是说现在的中国并没有像以前的那种传统的特工经验，所以他们反间谍的经验也并不是很充分。但是呢，如果你看到现在的话，就是现在的这个机密呢是在软件方面，并不是说在传递这个信息。那这就更比以前呢是更容易来培训和教那些个潜在的特工。我最后一点要说的就是非常重要要了解中共的体制和制度，他们比方说或安全部、军队，他们如何的
they may or may not have they may or may not be as centralized as we tend to think.
他们并不是我们想象的那样中央化。如果你读书里边的一些个案例的话，
and you also see some boneheaded things that you wonder, like, well, why would we take the Ministry of State Security seriously?
就是他们有一些，比方说我们为什么要把公安部看得这么重要、这么严肃？有一些呢，确实他们就是做得很好。
All of these organizations hire on their own. So should we really be surprised?
中央的国安部和各地各省的国安部门，他们都是自己去招聘他们自己的特工。
Should we really be surprised that, given the sort of the breadth and variety of what's in place in China, that an organization that is this diverse would look all over the map? And it brings up an important point where you can't just say that, oh, there's sophistication.
这就提出了一个很重要的问题。你看，这里有一个很复杂的案子，那里有一个很重要的案子，那是不是说这整个系统就是这样子的？
Intelligence officers first, rather than something else.
Well, thank you very much. And I also would like to thank the Jamestown Foundation.
我也要谢谢詹姆斯敦基金会，还有一些还有帮助我们。
Sometimes like we were hacking our way through the jungle, but here we are.
做成这
So
本书
I
的
won't
那
say
些
that I'm
人
going to take you through a tour of the history. I'm going to take you through a tour of the violent and exciting past. that led to
我想
today.
把大家
So
带入到一个
the year that the Chinese
暴力的
Communist
和
Party and the
激动
Kuomintang
的
split
过去。
was
在
the year of
1927 年
intelligence failures for the
毛泽
Chinese
东和
Communist
国民
Party
党
because
分
they had
裂出
virtually
来，
nothing in place. They had
他们
assassins,
并没
they
有
had
什么
VIP
特工
protection
的
people, and they had a few spies
能力
here and，there.
他们有几
but
个
they didn't
特务，
really
比
have
方说
structure.
还有他们暗杀，
And
但是
so
他们
the
并没有一个什
nationalist
么
coup
很好的
d'état
结
of
构。
April of that year came as a complete surprise. And indeed, at the end of the year,
在那一
in
年的年末，
December, the Canton Uprising,
1927年12月，在广东起义，毛泽东说我们失败了，因为我们并不了解敌人的情况。中共那时候建立了一建立了一个中共一开始的特工系统，他们招聘第一批
which is referred to today
间
as the
谍
three heroes of the
人员。
Dragon's Lair. Li Kenong was mentioned
李克农
earlier. He was out of those three people, including Li
他
as
是那
the
3个
ringleader.
人当中的第一个
He's the one who survived more than a few years, and indeed he went on to lead CCP intelligence in the early
他
years
呢
of the
就是
People's
存活下来了，所以后
So
来
the resulting
几年以后，他
that followed with
建立了中共的特工
intelligence
系统。
people, knuckle draggers, of course, everybody needs knuckle draggers, analysts, and people who do communications and
情
technical
报
work.
人员、通
That
信人员
resulting structure basically survives into the present, and it's of course changed a great deal. But the Special Services section that was founded at that time had successes that
特别
saved a lot
特别科
of lives of communist operatives.
他们
However, when their boss defected over to the nationalists in
救
1931,
了很多人吧，
that
但
was
是
a
当他们
disaster.
的
His name was Gu
老
Shenzhang,
板
and to this day,
顾顺章
like one of my
当他
distant relatives who's a
投
black
诚
sheep
到
in the
国民
family,
党，那
you
中共
can't
说他
find a
叛变
picture
到
of him.
共产党国民党那儿之后呢，他的全家被
So
中
in
共特工
1935,
全部
by
杀
that
害了，
time, although it's been
所以
depicted as a
我们
time
并没有他的照
of
片。
brilliant operations by
1935
clever
年的时候
individuals,
有一些很
actually, there
聪
was a
明的人，
slow rolling disaster for the Chinese communists as the nationalists cleared their people out of the cities. And in 1935, the Special Services section was
当国民
abolished.
党把共产
And this is
党
about the
就
time
是
that Mao
清
Zedong
理
started to
清
have
除，从城市
concrete,
清除到之后，
strong influence over intelligence operations, and his focus was enemies
毛泽
within.
东当时
If you've studied China, you've probably heard of the Futian
决
incident
定
in 1931-32.
要
when
清
he
洗共产
purged
党内部
a，great deal of
这
the
时
Red
候
Army
就
of
是
everybody who was
福
opposed to him. And
福
this
田
was
事
one of
件
the first, what the
他
Chinese
说要
today
清理
call the
共产
first
党
of
内部
three
的
left
敌人们。
deviations. They don't say that these were all driven by Mao Zedong himself, but they were.
共产党当时
Those
并
are
不
the
是说
three
这些
left
人
deviations
这
that are acknowledged
这
today
些人是
are,
被共产党
the,
毛泽东自己
Changzhou or
迫害的。
Salvation Campaign in Yan'an in 1943, and of course the Cultural Revolution. And in between those, in 1955, there was a gigantic purge of intelligence people when Mao Zedong decided that one of his
延
chief
安
spies in
运
the
动
revolution named
AB
Han
团运
Hanyan
动，
was actually a traitor because he hadn't
汤汉
recorded a
年
meeting
是中共特工人员的早期跟李克农是一起的，但是
Now
他
that left
被
a legacy
批
of
为
purges
叛
to
徒。
solve problems. And of course, we see that today. Even though Deng Xiaoping declared that the age
这个
of
历史呢，一
political
传
campaigns
流
is
到
over
现
with
在。
when he
虽然
ascended
虽然
to
邓
become
小平
China's paramount leader, today, of course,
成
we
为
see
毛
an
之后
anti-corruption
的
campaign
中共的领
that's
导
being used to purge the enemies of Xi Jinping.
他依然在用这一套系统呢，
But the point is that
来打击
these purges of corrupt
党内的
individuals
敌
that
人
are going
包
on now
括
have also
习
taken
近
in
平。
intelligence people. And indeed, these different purges that I just mentioned each have cleaned out the ranks of
他每一
Chinese
次的
communist
这种
intelligence.
中共的内部清洗活动
Very severe temporary
都
effect.
清洗掉了很多
Now,
他
part
们
of
的
that
特工人
legacy
员。
too that we see today
另外一个结
is
果，
that,
我们今天可能能
areas
看到
during the
的，就
revolution
是
were
那
under
些
control of Chinese communists
在中国的
and in the People's
中共的
Republic,
革命运动时
it was
期
a toxic environment for enemy spies,
清
for
洗
people
运动
who wanted to
和
come in and spy on the current government. And this was a continual drive, and it was
这是一个连续的
nearly impossible
运
to
动。
penetrate eastern China during the beginning of the PRC regime. A notable exception was the ambush on 25 October 1961 in Tibet of an army column by US-sponsored guerrillas that resulted in the capture of 1,600 pages of classified information, which you can find in libraries today. But that was the exception that proved the rule. It was Tibet. It wasn't Han China. So this strong toxicity for counterintelligence toxicity that stops the PRC from being a normal environment to infiltrate and spy has made it easier, interestingly, for the PRC to recruit foreign spies themselves, because
因为中共的多年的这些信息呢，外部的人比方说国外人是不了解，那么对中共来讲其实是更容易来招聘那些外国人来充当他的间谍们。
Focusing on an individual if there's any indication that they're somehow suspicious, like if they're working for what the Chinese call a Mingan de Danwei, a sensitive unit, sensitive company that has technology, or if you're Tibetan, or if you're Uyghur. So it's easier to spot, assess, and recruit foreigners in China under these conditions.
更容易呢，就是来招聘外国人，来做特工工作。我有一些注释。
The two FBI videos, which many of you may have already seen, are called Game of Pawns and Company Man. In Game of Pawns, we see a dramatized version of the Glenn Duffy Shriver case. In Company Man, we see a dramatized version of some industrial espionage, and the difference between the two is that in Game of Pawns, the Glenn Duffy Shriver case, we're looking at a professional operation. In Company Man, the industrial espionage case, we're looking at a state-owned enterprise following an amateurish program to try to get some industrial secrets. So with that, I'll say one more word about influence operations, because
我再说一点中国的影响力的活动推动。
There's always a mix-up, by the way, in CCP history between
中共的历史
underground
和
and the intelligence.
地下和
By
特工
1938-39,
情报总是混合在一起。1939年，情报系统成为了主要的
core operation,
运作。
core business of the party, along with propaganda,
共产党还
military
宣
work,
传
organizational.
和共产党的
And
宣
so
传
in
和军
the
队
offices that the
和
PRC,
政府
that the CCP had in nationalist cities at the beginning of the United Front period, which were like little embassies. There were
中
people
共
from each of those
一开始
departments,
在一些
including
大城市里
intelligence.
面有一些统战
And
部
the
的
intelligence people
部门，
then
那些特工
were
人
often the
员
ones who were called upon to pursue influence operations.
会被叫去
Red Star
运作
over
那
China,
些
which many of you may have read by Edgar Snow,
统战
is
系
an
统。
example of an extremely successful influence
斯
operation.
诺在他的书里
And who
边
was
讲的
involved in
就是那
that?
些非常成功的
Nobody
那些
less
运作
than。Song Qingling, Madame Sun Yat-sen, who was
宋
at that time
宋
not
庆龄
only trying to
孙中
influence
山的
people
太太，
to
那个时候
see
不
the
仅仅是
benefits
她
of
要
communist
她影响
revolution,
人
but she was also passing
利用她的
code books to
影
local
响力
agents,
来让人们
and
看
one
到
of her
中
chief
共的
contacts,
革命
indeed
的
was,
成果。
was Dong Jianwu, an agent of the Special Services
董
section.
建武当时
So
中
with
共
that,
的
I'll
一个特
conclude,
工。
and let's do some questions.
Great. Well,
我的话
I
讲完
want
了
to bring Aruna
有
into the
人提问题
conversation now and broaden this out a bit. I think I'll first just a couple follow-up
首
questions
先
based
我
on
想我有两个问题
Matt,
要
what you and Peter have been talking about.
你和
Peter, one of the things you'd mentioned is about bureaucratic politics or bureaucratic
Peter,
roles and behaviors.
你
So
谈过一
my
些
first
中共
question
的这
is
些
broadly looking at Chinese intelligence as a system. It's obviously operating under a political system controlled by a Marxist-Leninist party, which will give it particular characteristics.
它
Can you
这
talk a
些
little bit about
官僚的
what is it like to be an
像
intelligence
就是
service
中共
operating
苏
under
联
the Communist
列
Party
宁
of China?
和
What's distinct
苏
about
联
how
的这
its
些个运作方
bureaucratic
式？
incentives are as opposed to intelligence services in, say, modern democratic systems?
这个和现在的民主的系统有什么区别？苏共的官僚体制。有两个点，我的书里面要谈到。第一个就是现在最近在香港发生的事情，中共控制的媒体，中共的媒体，比方说人民日报。把香港的人民描绘成黑衣的暴动人。我们觉得可能中共是有这种恐慌症，那事实上他们是有他们自己的逻辑的。他就是给他们这种权利，让他们来把。这些事情的描绘成他们想要的。如果这个事情就是出现什么问题的话，那并不是说这些理论或者系统，那么他们就必须要做一点什么。问题是说，并不是说在发生什么，这些干扰是从哪儿来的？谁在干扰？然后他们就去寻找这些个证据，也许这些证据并不存在。然后这些特工人员就说，我们找到了，你看，这就是我们找到的。在一个逻辑性的体制内呢，这个是很难做到的。另外一个点呢，就是说，如果你看国安部，我并不知道，在任何他们这个当中的这个国安部里边。
more closely resemble the open source enterprise than they do, the Directorate of Intelligence at CIA. And
我没有看到在美国任何一个
I was told by a former intelligence officer from outside the United States that in his service's view, analysis was done at the ministerial level or the vice minister's office, where someone who'd been in the service for a long time and was trusted and had sort of the personal protection of someone at least at the level of a vice minister, that was where analysis could be done and put through the system. So what happens at sort of a more practical level is that you can see, I think a couple of these cases are discussed in the book.
就像我们在书中谈到的，你可以看到有一些人是，比方说他是学者，是记者。或者是另外一些调查员。
Why would I get pitched or why would this take place? And the answer is, well, because you can talk to people. And therefore,
为什么我会你们挑了我？因为你可以跟人交谈。
The analysis is from the source, not us. So don't blame
国安部那就会说这些信息是从这些线人来的，并不是我们的。在书中的第21页。
The lexicon suggests and has been borne out in interviews with former officials who have had
中国的特工用中文来讲是反映了苏联马克思和列宁主义的主义。
Having that level of firmness of belief in the party and its ideology.
Both, right? I mean, the downside are the two things that I talked about. The upside is
不好的。一面我刚才说的是好的一面，就是说，没有很多人投诚。
As I was reading through the book over the weekend,
我周末的时候把这本书读了。中共革命时期的特工，我觉得更有意思的是改革开放时期的这是特工。邓小平是当年的时代人物，还有可口可乐、耐克鞋，还有牛仔裤都进入中国。赵子阳
was the person who made the speech advocating the founding of the Ministry of State Security and talking about all the enemies that were coming into China because of reform and opening.
做了一次讲话，那么他谈到就是这些东西都是敌人。
When there was a party congress, I think it was the 10th.
1973年，中共的人大会议从地下通道带到，因为北京当时他们相信美国会把中国消灭吧。当外国人开始进入到中国的时候，那是一个转折点。当然，1985年，于强生的叛变是一个很大的当时一个很大的冲击。对中共来讲它是一个很大的叛徒。让我想谈到就目前2010年到2012年，忽然美国发现就是很多美国的 CIA 的人员在中国消失，或者情报也消失。是20个左右的美国的情报人员在中国被杀害。我有一个案子，我想提一下，也许不一定和你今天的主题相合。就是那个美裔香港人李振成，为什么这个案子会这么重要
？This pretty disastrous intelligence failure of 2010.
还有之前就是美国的，这是一个很重要的案例，是一个常年的美国情报局的情报员。他出卖了很多情报给中共。他几周以前他被判刑了，他有很多人名在他的本子上。当美国的情报人员去搜索他的酒店房间的时候，他还有很多现金存到香港的银行账户里，他有他不能解释这些钱是从哪儿来的，谁给他的，所以检方人员提出这些问题。他的辩护律师说，他并没有把这些信息给中共。律师说
gave them a harm assessment, and to their knowledge, the sources that he had listed in his notebook were not actually harmed. We don't exactly know if that's true.
他的律师说，他的小本子上记的那些个情报人员并没有得到伤害。
This pretty catastrophic leak of sources for the CIA is a little bit unclear, but some officials are definitely drawing a link between the two.
这个惨剧
sudden upsurge in I think concern that you're seeing coming out of the U.S. government, and this I think is a question for everyone. And I'd also like Matt and Peter, if you have any thoughts on the this 2010 period. But is this because we're seeing an uptick in actions by the Chinese? We've got the cases of Kevin Mallory, we've got Ron Hansen, we've got a number of these cases that are now being prosecuted. Is this an uptick, or do we just know more now and are paying more attention?
过去的这些例子说明，就是中共的情报更加猖獗了吗？还是说我们只是现在就比以前了解多了？
uptick in the number of cases that they've brought lately, and there seemed to be some concern that this was driven in part by China's specific efforts to get a lot of information about
中共现在就是加大了他们的努力，来获得美国政府雇员的信息。他们比方说我们通过信用卡，比方说他们会去知道去针对谁。一个很大的关心是，中共现在正在更好的了解谁去。
I would put it down to more aggression, more money, and more sophistication. And certainly
我觉得是应该是他们是更加具有攻击性、更先进。
Or if you chose to use the word doctrine, if you will. To build up sort of massive databases of people of potential interest. This is actually the original.
他们正在利用
to describe United Front work and the ministry's contribution.
现有的信息建立一个庞大的信息系统。
As social affairs. And social affairs work back in the 1930s meant basically mapping Chinese society for journalists, for academics, for other intellectuals who had a public platform, and how do you find them and influence them? Who are the important donors in the KMT? Who are the ones who keep things working? And in dealing with the United States, for many years they never had this.
和美国打交道呢，他们并没有不知道如何来打通美国的这些系统。
But necessarily knowing what it is, sort of at the lower levels,
他们并不了解美国的政府和情报系统。
Before they sort of worked on retirees.
以前呢，他们是针对一些退休的人员。
They're not having to report their finances. They're not having to go through serious scrutiny.
因为这些人已经不需要再再去被查他的银行信息。比方说他们有70年的时间针对台湾，跟美国呢，他们并没有这样的经历。
Also Anthem Insurance, which is the company that holds the largest federal insurance company, the United breach. All of a sudden you're putting together a much different data set of people and activities, and you're able to map that onto who are.
最近的这些例子呢，证明他们正在针对很多这些大公司，然后如果把这些事情联系在一起的话，那么他们就可以发现这些人都是谁。如果当他们了解这些人之间的关系之后，就非常容易的去追踪他们。
Next, I think a question that is not only about not only about Chinese intelligence operations, but it's this larger question dealing with influence operations. And this is this tension that we seem to have between having an open society, but also protecting national security. And one of the threat vectors which has been identified by the U.S. government in particular has been Chinese students and Chinese scientists.
中国的学生和中国的科学家们，
working on this as well. I wanted to get your thoughts on what is can you level set where the current state of debate is on the U.S. government in terms of how big the threat is?
就是你可以说一说现在这个有多大的威胁？比方说中国的这些学生和学者们，我们现在有准确的这个危险吗？还是说我们过度的担忧？
I think on the FBI side, at least, the concerns about talent programs and The efforts at
美国安
U.S.
全局
research universities are one of their
当
biggest
然是
concerns. I mean, you
比
saw
较
them.
担心
You
这
saw
个
the
事
FBI
情。
get up at a
就
Senate hearing a
美
couple
国的
weeks
一
ago
些
and basically
研究机构
say that they
当然
had
是
been
最大
slow
的威
to
胁。
understand this threat, and they wish they had recognized
他们希望
the
他
scope
们
of it sooner, and you don't often see them come out
能够
and
之前就了
acknowledge
解
any
这个 他
kind of
们中
missteps
共
like
的这
that. And
些
so I think that probably speaks to just how big a threat they do think it is. In terms of the current state of play,
他
I
们
think
介入的
the
这个
past
范
couple
围
of years they've spent a
因
lot
过
of
去的几
time
年
going
当
out
中
to U.S. universities, trying to
中
talk to
国
them
很
about
多的
these issues, and kind of not
美
quite
国的
calibrating their message
安全人员
correctly because they keep
进
talking
入到
about
这些学校
concerns
当中
about
和这
theft,
些
and then
人
you
来
have the universities ask them, well, show us what you're talking about. What is this theft? When what we
谈
do
话
here is essentially
来
for
了
the
解这些
public.
被盗
And
窃的信息。
given the nature of a lot of the stuff they're looking at, they don't want to get into specifics. They don't want to share classified information, and so I think there you have a
困
bit
难
of
是有一
talking past
些
each other.
老
And
师们
I
在
think
那
you've
边
seen
他们
the FBI
学者
try to
中国
recalibrate
的
how
他
they're
们并
talking
不
about
想
this and
把这些
getting
信息
other
提供
U.S.
出来
government agencies to kind of take the lead, the funding agencies, to be talking about it more as conflicts of interest
我们
and
需要
concerns about research integrity
更多的
and things like that. But I do think it
政
is
府
one
机构
of the biggest concerns
来参与
that
这件事情
even
来能够
FBI
获得
Director
更多
Wray
的信息。
has talked a lot about.
Just following up on that, what solutions do you hear FBI, U.S. government giving to universities to fix this
美
problem?
国
Are they
的
essentially
政
saying
府
this
和
is
FBI
just
有什
tighten
么
up the ship,
解决
or are they actually
办
coming with
法呢？
practical solutions that universities can implement?
I think as a baseline, they're
大
at least
学可以
asking them
实际去
to have
操
a full
作。
accounting of the kind of research funding that all of their
政
professors
府和大
and
学需
scientists
要
are getting, and to
有一个完
be
全
very
的
upfront about what
比方说这些
funding they
基
might
金
be getting from
给
these
中国
Chinese
学
talent
生
programs, because a lot of it was
和
not
学者
disclosed
们。
previously. So I think that's kind of a baseline that they're starting
对。
with, and then kind of
是
escalating
以
from
前
there.
是没有的，那么我们现在
Matt,
要
Peter,
做
you
一
have
个
any
很
thoughts on
清
this
晰
idea
的
of scientists
了
and
解。
students and how we might balance protection with openness? Or if that's even the right trade-off to be thinking of?
Well, the infrastructure that's been set up by the Chinese side to bring people back is
中共那边
apparently very
他们
extensive.
设置的系统呢
Includes,
是
helping
把
people
学生和学
move their
者
stuff back.
把东西
It
带回去，
includes,
就是把信息情报。
recruitment
比
efforts
方说
for scholars who are in the middle of
他们招聘
research.
一
Of
些
course,
学者
besides
正在做研究的一些学
professional
者，还有一
operations,
些
there's
比方
probably
说
a great
专
deal
业
of
的运
operations
作
that，are entrepreneurial in nature.
比方说还有一
And
些
so, when
创
it's
业
that way, then it looks a bit less
系统。
suspicious.
那
But I
样
think
呢
the
看上去
key
就不是那么
element that I hope is
令人怀疑。
developed further is that when a government agency pays for research,
当
that it's made clear to
政
the
府
researchers
机构
that they shouldn't be doing anything that runs against the contract.
当我们的政府给他们一个合
I'll
同
just
做
say that
研究的
from
时
my
候，那么
perspective,
他们
we're in
做
a
的
better
任
place
何
than we
研究
were
都
10
不
years
应该
ago
超越这
in
个
the way
合
that
同。
the U.S. government is able to talk to outsiders about this. The fact that so much of it is saying, well, trust us, this is in the classified realm, I don't think sort of fits well, because there's an awful lot of this information that's completely available from unclassified sources, and that is, that data is not being presented to explain in very concrete terms what's taking place, I think is a very significant shortcoming, because there simply aren't easy answers for how to handle visas, for example. The U.S. government
美国政府呢，比方说有一个很实际的问题，就是说，很难怎么说？比方说给他们签证。
But if you know how the visa process is done, you realize that thousands of these things get flagged as potential problems. I think out of the
如果你了解这个签证系统是怎么工作的话，你就可以看到，
sometimes the sort of automatically flagged that should be followed up are measured,
有很多事情是很多问题是被注明的。如果你真的每一个都去追究的话，那么你就可以看到，那么 有的人签证是不能给他的。
People throw up their hands and say, well, we're not even going to bother, then all of a sudden we're talking about a presumption of denial, and just all of a sudden tens of thousands just go away. Some perhaps fairly, many probably not. And it's a blunt,
如果以前我们并不没有追究那些细节的话，那么忽然你说我们要严格了，那么可能很多几千人都签证都拿不到。那几千人当中，也许有一些人，那么对他们就是应该得到的结果，可是很多人并不是。
Is this still an interagency process with a time limit where you can object or say nothing?
I'm not entirely sure.
I want to open up to questions, or just one final one, because the quote's good, and I want to see if it's actually true, which is this. We see this dichotomy brought up a lot as well in influence operations, this contrast between Russia and China, and a supposedly qualitatively different feel to the way Russia does things versus China. This quote, this Russia is the hurricane, it comes in fast and hard. China is climate change, long, slow, pervasive. I want to get thoughts. You could ignore the Russia part of this if you don't have an answer to it, but on the China side, does that accurately describe what we're dealing with?
俄国向台风快有利，但是快；中国向气候变化慢，但是具有侵略性。可以不用说俄国那边的，那你说中国是这样，这种描述是准确的吗？
Anyone?
So, I've been asked the question more than a few times over the last couple of years about how to sort of compare and contrast the U.S. or China and Russia.
如果就是怎么去比较美国对俄国和中国？关于特工方面的，我觉得这个是有。
You see all of the traditional motivations that are exploited. You see efforts to coerce people into spying. You see people who are paid a lot of money into spying. And if you're doing that, you want results, right? You don't put $800,000 down because you think you're going to get something someday. Right? If you're putting that kind of money down, you think that you're getting value immediately. So that's not necessarily, a 10, 20-year sort of vision of how we sort of cultivate someone and maybe get something out of it. On the influence side, though, this issue of sort of political influence,
在政治影响力的扩张方面
and in the Soviet days, the intelligence services played
俄国方面，比如在苏联时期
they were sort of some of the main sort of executors of the policy. They played a crucial role in planning it. They had a lot of the capability to push ideas out there. On the Chinese side, I think you have to say that the Ministry of State Security or the Military Intelligence Department play a supporting role, and that it's held at more senior levels within the party, handled at the Politburo level quite directly, and from central government or central party departments, and not from the ministries. And you can see that the Ministry of State Security, like the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Education, does contribute to this work, and they can play a critical role in part because they've got capabilities that say the Ministry of Education wouldn't have, but they're not the leading role, and they're not the designer of policy, and they're not necessarily pitching out ideas in the same way that you can see Russia does.
The other point I'd make is that the only time the Chinese services have acted like the KGB was 1942 to 44, and other than that, they've been under much more strict party control. They haven't been purging the party. Although lately, of course, MSS has been involved in some anti-corruption investigations.
对于中国来说，比如说从1940年代呢，他们可能比较像克格勃，但是最近呢，他们并没有在国内搞清理的活动，但最近呢，他们也起一些作用，比方说在反腐的运动当中。
Mike's coming down your way.
I'm Jim Mann. I wanted to come back to the late 70s, 80s period.
我想提1970年代、80年
period when the United States and China were engaged in very specific intelligence cooperation.
那是
Cambodia.
中国和美国当时是在特工方面有一些个合作系统，比方说阿富汗。还有一些那时候在新疆。我的问题是说，到什么程度美国帮了
？Bill Casey are making secret trips to China. To what extent did the United States help in the development of Chinese intelligence, either technically or in managing a new
技术方面，或者是管理，比方说国安部方面。
Well, I can only give a limited answer.
我只是能提
Certainly on
供
the technical
一些
side,
在
yes,
技术方
there
面
was
的
help
回答。
from the U.S.
美国在技术
As
方
far
面
as
提
human
供了
goes, I'm
一
not
些
aware of any
帮助。
such help. Indeed, I believe
我
that
不
the
了
two
解
sides have always kept in
两方
touch.
一直
But I
保
don't
有
think the
联
U.S.
系
has，ever trained the Chinese side
但
like
是
the
美
Soviets
国
did
并没有
in the early days of the
培训
PRC.
中共的特工系统，像苏联呢是培训了。
Alex, wait for the talking stick to come your way.
Thanks. Alex Bowie, U.S. China Commission. So, Peter, you said earlier in your remarks that China has world-class intelligence capabilities. You also mentioned this in, I think, Chapter 6, especially with the fusion of human and technical means. Could you explain a bit what you mean by world-class in this context? Does that mean parity with the U.S.? Does it mean something better that we can't do, or something else?
可以解释一下，你在第6章说中共现在有世界级别的特工系统。
I would define world-class as
我
being
定
able
义
to
世界性的
handle
级别
sensitive sources in
是
sensitive
它可
government
以
departments that
解
have to
决
undergo a security checkup and might be subject to some serious scrutiny, and to be able to do that in a hostile environment. The
在一
second
个
would be
具有敌意的
that their proficiency
系统
is
下
not limited to a specific sort of geographic place, but that there is a sort of a
可以
global scope, maybe not everywhere all the
解决
time, but certainly on a able to
出现的
operate
问
in a
题。
variety of different contexts. And on the issue of mingling human and technical, it's
在混合人
I guess the way
和
that I would put it is
技术
think of
方
the way
面
that you
的
would get to an air-gapped network, right? You need to recruit a source who has access to that network and can carry a device
你
across it
需要招
and have
聘
it, you know,
人，那么
either
而且在这个
deliver a sort
系
of
统
program themselves, or to access that
工作，
network and bring things
而
out
且
and be able to
开
conceal
发
that activity.
这样的
And there were a couple of Taiwanese cases
项目
where
和
they
软件，
where
有
the
一些比方
Chinese
说
intelligence
台
services showed that they could do that.
台湾方面的案例，那么中共的特工系统是他们展示了他们可以做这样的事情。
I'm David Crandall, retired from Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration, where I worked on the science side of nuclear weapons part of the time. And I now work with some Chinese people, Chinese
我现
scientists
在
who
和一
work
些
on
中
the
国
nuclear
的
weapons side, but do open science as well. What we work on
开
exchange is
放
only
性
open
的
science.
科学，做一些交换方面的事
My
情。
security clearance information was stolen twice through OPM.
我
But
我
it's
的
clear that the people I've worked with have never seen it.
安全部门
So
被
I'm
偷了
interested
2
in
次，
how did they use
安
it,
卡
and
偷了2次，
are they as compartmentalized as we are?
他们怎么能做到这个的？
The answer would be like we are, yes and no. In part because I don't think we have a clear grasp of how things get shared across the entire system. Right? Everyone who's interacted with Chinese government interlocutors at some point has seen, a little bio across the table that's been prepared. So there's obviously some sharing of that kind of information, and that it's accumulated across government, not just the intelligence services, and is put in. When you look at the sort of classics of Chinese negotiating behavior, there's discussions about how the Chinese side seems to be quite prepared in dealing on who they're dealing with.
中国方面的，如果比方说你开会的时候，你就看中国，他们会对我们的人员了解的
So we know something like that, information like that is conceivably shared across the system, but we don't know what that classification is or how they classify it, depending on what kinds of information that they have. And if they are talking about information about your clearance and what they stole, is that something that's necessarily shared with everyone you come in contact with? Well, it sounds like not. But you could bump into someone if you were meeting them in China where it's a colleague who is in fact very well
验证了，那么这个信息是不是每一个跟你接触的中国人，他们都分享这个信息？
I think if you take a mature policy system like Taiwan affairs or Hong Kong and Macau affairs, it's likely that information is shared quite closely. In part
如果
because
你看，
all of
比
the
方说
different
台湾
party
问题或者
departments
港澳问
and
题，
the
那么
intelligence services
那些
actually share
特工
other
的系统
organizations.
可能特工人员
United Front Work
会
Department, the Ministry of State
比较
Security,
广泛的分享
the
他
political
们所
warfare
拥有
people
的
in the
信息。
PLA, military intelligence, they can actually all be in the same organization and using the same platforms for
比方说
operation.
中国的
So it presumed
中共
that
的
that,
军队，
the fact that they
还有
might be sitting in
军
some of
队
the
里
same
边的
spaces
特
some
工
of
人
the
员
time,，
那么
that
他们可
information
能
would
都
be
会
shared
去
more
共
readily.
享一
And
些
what
信
that
息
means。in a less mature policy system where the different agencies are not necessarily as well integrated, I think would be anyone's guess.
The other thing is that Chinese side has a history of denying everything. I think that
另外一方面就是
somebody, one of your interlocutors
中国
was
那边
giving
他
that information, they were
他
told,
们
and don't hint that you know this.
他们不会承认他们做了这个事情。
I'm Bethany Allen Abrahamian. I'm the China reporter at Axios. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about Wang Liqiang, I believe that's his name, the perhaps defector in Australia right now. Is he who he says he is?
他是他像他所声称的人那样吗？
So there are, I think, a few things to keep in mind about what's been put out there in public about Wang Liqiang. The first is that there are a number of arguments against him being genuine, saying, well, an intelligence officer wouldn't do these things and they wouldn't act like this. And first and foremost, he's never actually claimed to be an intelligence officer.
首先呢，
He
他
claimed
自
to
己
be,
并没有说他
what
是一个中国
in
的
at
特
least
工人
sort
员
of Five Eyes intelligence parlance for those people would be called a co-optee. He's kind of a staff adjunct, if you will, who's picked up by the intelligence officer themselves and integrated into what they were doing. So that's the key part of his claim. He's not someone, what we know from other cases that are sort of out there in public of these types of people is that they will be involved in operations, they will be close to the system. But they're not going to know bureaucratic information because they're not connected by through professional linkages back to the services themselves. What they have access to is basically what would be taking place around them. And so, he could be opening envelopes to have read things. He could have been keeping an eye on sort of the comings and goings and also to be able to discuss what kinds of things he was personally involved in. So that, I think, is an important piece to understand about who he is and who he claims to be.
那一点是需要
is that some of the questions that have been raised about him from, for example, the Deputy Director of Military Intelligence, former Deputy Director of Military Intelligence in Taiwan, his argument was that because of single-line handling in the intelligence services, this was an impossibility.
台湾的前国防部长说，中共一直是单线联系，所以从这一点上来看，说王立强不可能是一个特工人员。所以从历史上来看，中共并不是一直都是单线联系的。那也许是在革命时期，也许是很多其他的案例，比方说国安部。
where it's clear that one of the people involved in the case worked for the Shanghai State Security Bureau, and the other one seems to have been a business person who provided
他提到的一个是在上海的公安局，还有另外一个是在一个商人。
You can't say
你并不能说
that Chinese intelligence operations
中共的特工系统
professional, only
并
handled
不
by
是
the
说像一
service
个那种
in this very
专业
narrow
的
specific way. That this that this part of his story does actually compare favorably to other contexts. So the questions about whether or not he's reliable, the Taiwanese things that he said are things that you could have said from reading off the press and having a very close read. We don't necessarily know what his claims are about Australia because as part of a court case that's been taking place in the last year or 2 years, the truth was ruled out as a defense from Australian paper on a libel thing. So if you are the age, why would you put the specifics in there? And we don't necessarily know why there was a connection, what the connection is with ASIO or ASIS. And a quick final point is that if the person is knowledgeable about intelligence operations and intelligence services, you would know that if you went strictly to the Australian government, they would say, we'd like you to go back in and do this for a couple of years and then come out and we'll talk about sort of taking care of you. Because it's much better to have someone running in place than it would be to have them
你赶紧回到中国去，你在中国那儿再做几年的话，然后再回来会带来很多有用的信息。
So if you were someone who is a part of this system, connected obliquely as he was, why would you want to, and you want to get out, why would you try to keep it quiet? It's not a clean answer, but I think those are some of the things to think about. It's still, because we don't have access to everything that he said, we're not able to interview him. We don't necessarily have full visibility into the due diligence that the Australian government performed or that the age performed in looking at him.
并不了解那些信息，我们只能从媒体上得到的一些。
I don't think they're babes in the woods, and there are a lot of people in Australia who, both inside government and outside government, who know how to do this work. So I think
在澳洲有政府内外呢，都有很多专业人士知道怎么去处理这个事情。
Jeff Chen with the China Scope. We know the big unique part of this espionage is they use non-traditional actors, Chinese students and scholars. So I have 2 questions. Okay, all right. Do you think this has to do with Chinese government brainwashes Chinese people with the so-called patriotism? I myself grew up singing "The party is better than my mom," so serving the country is serving the country is serving the party, and loving the country is to hate America and Taiwan. So I guess this influence follows the Chinese students to this country, and the majority of the students get information from Chinese media. So I just wonder what your thoughts are relating to this.
更重要，就是说这个王立强的这个事情和中共的对爱国主义洗脑，有没有什么？
We'll come back to that. We'll think about that. Why don't we open it up to another question here while folks are thinking? Right there.
我们想一想，等一下再回你的问题。
My left.
Hi, Mary. Quick question. Ministry of Public Security. So we've mentioned for the intelligence services, MSS and PLA. What about MPS? What role do they play in the intelligence service apparatus, and what role will they play going forward?
Well, after 1949, they were the primary counterespionage and counterintelligence service. And the counterespionage elements of it were carved off in 1983 to join the Ministry of State Security. And until the Ministry of State Security did not become a national organization until the mid-1990s. And so there were an awful lot of public security people who had counterespionage type roles and then were eventually moved as departments changed. So they've always had a certain amount of a role. I guess it's hard to figure out what the Ministry of State Security's access is to the sort of the massive surveillance systems that are going up in China.
现在还很难说，国安部呢现在中国广泛的现在这种监控系统起多大的作用？
That changes based on the locality or in the relationship of individuals, but I don't think we know its face. So if they solely control those resources inside China, that means they have an incredibly important capability that will be crucial to counterintelligence and counterespionage. And so they would probably be taking a more significant role in it. They've also been involved outside of China. It was the Ministry of Public Security that was in Burma and Laos, trying to track down Namka and the perpetrators of the 10-5 incident in October 2011, where 13 Chinese river sailors were killed. It was the NPS, not the PLA, not the Ministry of State Security, that had its people sort of on the ground contributing to the hunt. And for a number of the sort of the anti-corruption investigations outside of China, it's clear that the Ministry of Public Security has also been there. So we might be, if there's a comparison to Russia, it might actually be similar to the SVR and the FSB, that yes, the FSB is internal and the SVR is external, but the FSB is moving around quite a bit. I don't think I don't think we can draw sometimes a clear distinction between what's a state security threat versus what's a public security threat, and therefore, who actually gets jurisdiction.
I once worked on a case where an MPS officer demonstrated to me that he had knowledge of an MSS arrest of an American businessman by sitting behind his desk at his computer and just dialing it up. And when I asked him about that, he said, well, we're the ones who are responsible for Guanli, for taking care of the foreigners in our district, so they have to keep us informed at a certain level. So that's just a
当他坐在他的桌子后面打电话的时候，我问他就是这个过程。他说我们是管理外国人的这个部门，公安部。
Dan Garrett, Security and LLC. Countries, when they're in a moment of existential crisis, always activate their national technical means and their intelligence services. What does the history of Chinese intelligence tell us about how China may surge its intelligence apparatus now to deal with its most existential crisis with the U.S.-China relation and also the situation in Hong Kong? Thank you.
I don't think we have a good sense of how fast that takes place. One of the points that Matt raised was noting that a strong counterintelligence served as the basis for foreign intelligence. And of the public examples that are out there, I think we only have 2 cases that are public where the recruitment and the handling of a source was done completely outside China.
招聘的这个情报人员完全都是在国外。
To address some of these issues. What does that mean? I guess the way I would interpret that is that until there's a much larger sort of foreign intelligence capacity at the human level, that sort of collection in cyberspace in computer network exploitation is going to be the primary means for trying to get out, because that's the easiest way to have a global capability and to reach out as quickly as possible.
The historical case I can point to is the loss of the Kashmir Princess flight in 1955, I think, 55. And during that time, the whole PRC government, especially the intelligence services, were involved in an intense investigation in Hong Kong. Ended up showing that Taiwan was indeed behind it.
是在背后的指使。在1955年，有一个中国的飞机被击落。
I'm Alex Alper with Reuters. I just wanted to ask, I guess, more on the corporate side of things. There's been a lot made about the National Intelligence Law, I think, from 2017. and how it could require, the government could require companies to hand over data or spy on their behalf, and I just wondered
就想问一下，就是公司方面，因为中共政府可以要求政府提供任何的信息和数据。
Well, the propaganda that
中共的
has been
宣
reported
传
on, for example, by the New York Times, the cartoons, the videos
比方说纽时
indicate that one should never
发
hold
表
back
了一些，
any
比
information
方说
from
一
state
些
security.
卡通啊、漫画呀，还有一
Then you
些
look at
的视频呐。
every company that's
每一个公
that's
司
big enough has a party committee. So the
都有一
discipline
个
that would
党
naturally come with that
党委，
indicates that indeed people
那就是说
do what they're told and they cooperate.
你就得
And
让你做什么你就
I
得
just
做什
find
么，你
it
就得合作。
conceptually impossible that anybody would try to push back. Now I've heard that
我觉得好像
I think
如果
Tencent
你
supposedly pushed back, but quite frankly, I just don't believe it.
你要拒绝，但是我感觉应该是很难的吧。
I'll just say, when I had a visit or a discussion with
我有一次和
the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, they more or less.
Can you explain who Kicker is for folks who may not know?
They're one of the MSS bureaus, and they do open source research and open source so interviews,
做公开的信
essentially
息
for the purpose of analysis, and they also serve as an international relations training program for the rest of government and for the rest of the Ministry of State Security.
国际关系培训。
I asked,
我问他，
we'd had a discussion about U.S. intelligence reform 5 years before, and this time it was time to say,
讨论了一些美国
now it's your
5
turn
年
to
之
speak
前的
about China's intelligence
过去
law.
5年的
And he said,
美国
the
的
thing
情
that you
报
need to
系统，
understand
现在
about
是
all
你
of
的
this
干的时候。他
national
说
security
你了解
legislation is
就
that it's
是
basically putting
国
in the
安
law
的
what was already the rule, right? And making it clear that everyone understood that, this was the way it worked implicitly before.
现在
It's going
就
to
是
work
只
this way
是把
explicitly
以
now.
前的那些个规则变成法
Which
律
is
了。
also a great way to cut back on corruption, because if it's in the law, it's easier to prosecute somebody.
也比较方便，就是去把那些个腐败的人抓起来，因为现在已经写进法律了。
Hi, sorry, Adam Cozy with CrowdStrike. Was very glad to see SNITSEC or CNITSEC in the book. Yeah, Peter, you had mentioned earlier that there was kind of a lack of an analytic bureau, or that Kicker was kind of the ones doing the analysis for them, which I think stands in quite contrast to what we think about with the U.S. intelligence community. So my question is basically who, in your mind, kind of comes up with some of the intelligence requirements? How developed is the relationship between, say, state-owned enterprises and the MSS to kind of create those requirements that then trickle down to what they collect on, since they don't have as robust an analytic capability?
Hi, Bob Sittinger. Congratulations, by the way, on this book. It's timely and it's overdue in some cases. But my question to you is, you described this as a primer, with the notion that there should be something else coming down the road that would expand upon this. And I wonder what you would consider to be the priority issues that should be addressed and who should address them.
后续的问题或者书或者是问题需要。
Mark Stuckert, just retired from U.S. Government Commerce Department. Got your book about a week ago. It's phenomenal, really very, very insightful. Question, the FBI has said that they've got investigations about Chinese espionage going in every single 50 of the states. There is a vast array of Chinese espionage, which you detail very well in your book, Grains of Sand and many others. How many Chinese spies would you estimate are working currently for the U.S. government that are embedded?
McCarthy era started, by the way.
你估计有多少中国的间谍正在给美国工作，在美国政府？
like SOEs who may be able to fill an analytical gap. What gaps do we have in the research moving forward that will form the core of your second book on this? And then the last question, how many spooks in this room?
I guess I'll take the last question since it's the easiest to respond to, which is I'm not gonna guess. This is the kind of thing that have to be quite careful of, and this is part of the point of the way that we structured this book was to start on the conservative side, so that there's a hard center, if you will, that you can work out from.
这个问题我们还是必须要得小心。我们这本书也是从一个比较保守的，这是一个基本的一个。在中共的情报方面，他们有一个并不是正规的体制在。为国安部工作。比方说，在延安时期，到50年代到今天，
where should we be looking and trying to explore? It's trying to take, okay, what do we know about the formal systems and how do we understand
就是在共产党的内部，中共内部呢，也有一部分人并没有被中共的这个官僚体制信任。
With former officials or current officials in other governments have sort of said, yes, there's something there for the central generation of reports and collation and distribution of them. But you can also see things in, say, the Jiangsu State Security Department case, where you have an intelligence officer working for the Jiangsu State Security Department. He's employing people to hack into GE Aviation, and he's working closely with Nanhang University.
比方说，在江西省，
for the material out of GE Aviation. So there, in this case, it seemed to be a direct connection that was generating it. Now, whether that was sort of formally sanctioned and he was said, your job is to figure out how to help these guys, or whether it was a personal connection, how that developed, I don't, at least from what's available, it's anyone's guess. So there is something central, but there is something that seems to be kind of ad hoc and customer driven. With respect to that. And I'll just make a final note on this issue of analysis, because Americans like to talk a lot about intelligence analysis in this sort of all-source strategic assessment vein.
有一些是，比方说中央控制的，有一些就是很随机的。美国人很喜欢谈论就比方情报分析，这是一个美国的发明。
I want to bounce back to the question about Chinese abroad. That was from the back of the room. So I live in San Jose, California. The restaurant situation is vastly improved because of all the Chinese and Indian people who live there. I have Chinese friends, and the ones who are over 35 and who studied here and who were involved in Chinese student associations.
那儿的餐馆业呢，因为中国人有很大的发展。
With the involvement of Chinese officialdom in their business, and so that certainly seems to have changed. There's a much more focused effort, I think, to harness the influence of Chinese people, and they don't have to be brainwashed. Because they've been raised in when I was based in Beijing, my daughter was in Chinese schools. And she heard all about how the Americans were actually responsible for the opium that started the Opium War, et cetera, et cetera. They already have a view of history which is conducive to harnessing their influence. And as for what we're doing in our next book, I just want to say I'm not imitating anybody here. Beijing, if you're listening, we don't yet have from you a Chelsea Manning or an Edward Snowden. We need that. We need those documents. Ante up.
Any final thoughts, comments, conclusions? Yeah, obviously to the poor MSS
关于
analyst
下一本
who's
书
awake right now
北
at
京，你如果正在
4:30
听我
having
讲
to
话的
watch
话，
this
我
and
们
write a
需要
memo. I'm sure he'll-
切尔西或者
That
是
may be the Chelsea
史诺
Manning,
登
this
的
may be the spark.
那些个
Um,
信息，
Thank
我
you,
们需要
thank
那
you
些
everyone
信
up on
息
the
来写
stage.
下一本
Thank you
书。
all of you who came. Although not technically an exit tax, we are selling the book outside, and so you can leave without purchasing it. Although we will make it difficult.
谢谢各位。
Because Peter will be downstairs at the lobby, looking at you expectantly. But we are selling the book. I do
我们
encourage you
在
to
外边
buy it. I don't know if you were able to hang around for a few minutes.
会有书卖，
to,
如果
sign copies.
如果你要不买
Thanks again,
书的话， 你
and
就会
hopefully we'll have them
有
back, in 12 months
困
when they
难，
finish
因
and
为
publish their next book. So thank you.
Peter 会站在楼下，盯着你。谢谢。哎呦，我不行了，好多跟不上，他们讲得很快，而且。